let's look at a few keywords. And of course, keywords cannot be used as variable names or function names or any other identifier. Of course, keywords are case sensitive. If you already know C, C++, or Java, there are keywords like if, else, etc. In and I think in C we also have other keywords like for, right? All these are reserved words which have a specific meaning in the language, and hence you cannot use those words the way you would want, right? So let's look at a bunch of keywords that are there in Python. So to do that, this might look a little alien to you, this sort of syntax, but let me give you a quick overview of what this is. We'll go and understand this, what an import means, a little later in the course on what import actually means. But simply put it, since this is the first snippet of code that you're looking at, import keyword is sort of like hash include stdio.h in C. I'm assuming most of you have some exposure to C. So where you're including a header file and all the functions that come with it. Here, import keyword is basically saying that I want to import this package or module into this code snippet, right? And then your print is just like your printf, right, in C. So you're just saying print keyword.kwlist. So kwlist here is a list. We'll understand what lists are a little while later. List is a special data structure which can hold a bunch of values. Okay, for now you can think of it like an array, just for now. Of course, there are differences between lists and arrays, but for now just think of it as an array for simplicity. So I'm saying print the keyword list. The moment you say this, you get this bunch of keywords. So false is a keyword, none is a keyword. Just like C, you have if as a keyword. You also have else as a keyword. You have for as a keyword. There are more keywords here than in C, of course. In C, you don't see the keyword class, right? In C, you don't see the keyword raise, right? Of course, you do see the word return for function return and things like that, right? You don't see the word yield in C. And if you want to know how many keywords are there, it's also very simple. You're just simply again printing. You're using the function len, len, which stands for length. So you want to know the length of this keyword list, right? Keyword.keyword list. So this is the name of the module in which this list is present, and you're just saying keyword.kwlist, which prints the length of the keyword list. And there are 33 keywords in Python. So by the way, I'm using Python 3 here. I strongly recommend all of you use Python 3 because in my notebook, and by the way, this is a IPython notebook. It's very interactive. For example, let's see. I can run this code here. I can just run this cell like this. Right? I just ran it. Suppose if I remove this line, I'll show you how to do comments later. But if I just remove that line goes away, right? I'll show you some interactive code as and when needed. But for now, I'll just go through the code snippets that I've already written, just so that I don't screw it up in between. Having said that, let's look at identifiers. Now, what is an identifier? Identifier is basically names given to things like variables, functions, or classes in Python. Any name that you can use, any variable name that you can use. And there are a bunch of rules on how to write identifiers. So identifiers can be a combination of lowercase, A to Z, uppercase, capital A to capital Z, digits or underscore. Okay. So for example, if you say ABC underscore 12 equals to 12, this is valid because what we have are lowercase alphabets. We are using the underscore. We are using a bunch of numbers, right? The next thing is an identifier cannot start with a digit. For example, let's see this example here. Let's go and see this snippet. For example, if I say 12 underscore ABC equals to 12, right? And let me just run it. Okay. It says this is an invalid token. If you notice this error, it says 12 underscore ABC is invalid. So what if I just remove the ABC? Can I start it with a number basically? Or it says 12 ABC is invalid syntax, right? So you can't start an identifier like a variable name with a numeric symbol like a digit between 0 to 9, right? But you can put it anywhere. So for example, here I can say this is perfectly okay. You just can't start it. So here you're getting the error for global and not for A12, right? Similarly, you can't use keywords as identifiers. So if you go up and notice here, we do have global. Where is global here? Global is a keyword, right? So you can't use keywords as variable names. That's the third rule of writing identifiers, right? So for example, if whenever I write global equals to 1, so here what did I write? I tried to give a variable name as global and assign it a value of 1. It says this is invalid syntax, right? The rules are simple. Okay, you can use small a to z, capital A to Z, digits or underscore. You can't start it with a digit, right? And keywords cannot be used as identifiers. Very simple rules, nothing very fancy there, right? Or there is another bunch of rules. For example, you can't use special symbols like exclamation, ampersand, hash, dollar, etc. in identifiers. For example, if you write this, if you say anywhere, not necessarily at the start, anywhere in the variable name or an identifier, you can't do that. If you say a ampersand equals to 10, it says it says invalid syntax. Right? This is my comment. Okay, we'll see. And by the way, if you've just noticed by looking at a small snippets of code here, you'll notice that Python gives very, very readable errors. It's very, very easy to interpret what they are. Right? We'll see more of this as we go a little later, as we understand how to debug things, how to use more complex and interesting concepts in Python. We're just getting warmed up like this, right? Which are not interpreted by a compiler or your interpreters. So they're not executed, if I have to put it that simply. And they're typically used to write exploratory pieces of your code to make your code more readable by humans. For example, here you could say this is print hello world to console. So it's saying what this line of code below that is doing. And one of the simplest ways to write comments in Python is to start the line with a hash, with this symbol, which is right above your 3 key on your keyboard, right? So that's the simplest way to write a single line comment. Of course, if you want to write multi-line comments, here is how you can write it. Of course, you can write a multi-line comment like this with hash starting on each line. Or a better way to write it is to actually start your comments with your triple quotes. We saw the triple quotes are used typically to represent your strings, right? Multi-line strings. So you can actually start with triple quotes, and this will be regarded as a multi-line comment. Of course, you can use either single quotes or double quotes. Both of them will work equally well. Now, unlike many programming, for example, in C, if you recall, how do you put a block of code? How do you write a block of code? For example, if I'm writing a for loop in C, I typically might write int I equals to 10, I less than 100, I plus plus, and I typically put all of this code in your curly braces, right? So this is a block of code. This is how I define that all of this piece of code, whatever I write here, will be executed whenever this for will be looped through using your for condition, using your for loop, right? So what happens is, unlike your C, C++, or Java, Python actually has an indentation which is slightly unique. What it does is, so if this is my for loop, so this is a simple for loop. What it says is for I in range 10. So we'll look at loops in much more detail later. But what this does is basically it goes this is equal to saying for I equals to 0, I less than 10. This is what it literally means, because when you print it, you'll see that, right? But you don't see your curly braces. You don't see your C's. You don't notice your C program or Java's curly braces here, because what Python uses is an indentation of this sort, where if this is my code flow, if this is the line on which my code is flowing, if I have some gap here, it assumes that till the time the gap is there, it is all part of my for loop. So it uses, typically, it's a good habit to use 4 spaces for indentation, right? Some people also use a tab, but it's recommended to use 4 spaces because tabs could be interpreted slightly differently in various text editors, right? So, for example, if you look at a code like this, okay, for example, if I write a line like this, let me just edit this code so as to make it interesting, right? So I just said, okay, print I in 1 to range. Now if I just go back here and if I say print 100, right? So this print 100 here is not part of my for loop because it's at the indentation of for. So everything here, for example, if I change this to print I multiplied by 2, right? So I get my print I and print I print. So both these lines, so 0, 0, 1, 2, 2, 4, 3, 6. So this whole piece of code that is highlighted here is part of my for loop because it is indented at the same level inside the for loop. But my print 100 is not in my for loop. That's important to notice. We might ask, what if instead of 4 spaces, I have 1 space, right? So sorry. So I think I mistakenly used a tab here. It's always, sorry, it's always good to use 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So I could say 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Then the question is, what if I put a single space? So this line now is neither at the for loop nor at the print statements, right? Then what happens? It simply raises an error. It says you have not indented it properly. It's called an indentation error. And your IPython is smart enough to realize that there is an indentation problem, and it highlights it in red as you type, right? But you can get rid of this. You can get rid of this problem if you just make your this print 100 line start with your for, or if you just make it go inside your for loop, right? So this is a very useful way. Let me explain you why. Because this makes your code readable. It makes your code look beautiful and interesting to read. Let me show you an example. For example, this is how your if your if conditional statement looks like in Python. I'll promise you. I promise you that we'll look at the if-else conditions in more detail. But there are two ways of writing this if statement. I can say if true, print this. Of course, there are 4 spaces here, which means both of them will be executed if true. Of course, if true, and hence these two will be executed. I could have written the same thing in just one line like this. And these two statements now are delimited using a colon. When you have a colon like this, what it says is that these two statements need to be executed one after other, and they're on the same line. But this is not readable. If you look at readability or the cleanliness of code, or how easy is it to just flow through your code, this is much less readable. Of course, they both are doing exactly the same thing. But remember, code readability is as important as code correctness. Because when you write code, maybe 100 other people may read your code later. And your code should be in a state that people can easily understand what's happening. The next concept is statements. So statements are basically commands that your Python interpreter will execute. Okay. So for example, what does this do? It basically assigns a value of 1 to a variable a. This is a simple statement. Let's look at slightly more variations of statements. So this is called a multi-line statement, because your whole statement, your 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8, is split over multiple lines. So when you're splitting your whole statement across multiple lines, it is mandatory that you use this backslash symbol at the end of the line, telling the interpreter that, okay, what comes in the next line is actually part of the same line, right? So when you execute it, you'll get print a, you'll get 36, which is the sum of all the numbers from 1 to 8. It just works like magic. The other way to do multi-line statements, instead of using a backslash, if you put everything in your parenthesis like this, it understands the moment you open a parenthesis like this or a small braces, it understands that till the time the braces are closed, everything is part of the same statement, and everything will work like a charm. The third type of statements that we will see is you can actually have multiple statements on the same line. In this case, we had a single statement spanning across multiple lines. We could have multiple statements in a single line, probably for brevity or for shortness if you want to write it. If you want to write short, quick snippet of code, this is how you can write it. Of course, here 10 is assigned to A, 20 is assigned to B, and 30 is assigned to C. The most important thing is the semicolons. If you notice, we haven't put semicolons anywhere else, but if you don't put a semicolon here, it will raise an error. It will raise an exception. Okay. As long as you put your semicolon, it knows that, okay, this is one statement, this is another statement, and this is another statement. So the delimiter between multiple statements in a single